Gordie Howe International Bridge may be delayed. President Trump is threatening its opening, claiming Canada isn't treating the U.S. with fairness and respect when it comes to how this bridge is paid for.
But we do want to begin in Windsor, Ontario. This is the view from the city looking towards the Gordie Howe International Bridge that links with Detroit.
Power struggles don't always happen in war rooms or on debate stages. Sometimes they unfold over steel, concrete, and a river that connects two economies. And this time, the battleground is a bridge worth billions. The Gordie Howe International Bridge. When Donald Trump's camp signaled new pressure over cross-border trade infrastructure, few expected Canada to respond the way it did. The assumption in Washington was simple. This bridge is too important for Canada to push back. The United States is the larger market. The leverage sits south of the Detroit River. Ottawa would calculate risk and quietly align. Instead, Mark Carney did the opposite. The Gordie Howe Bridge is not just another infrastructure project, it is a $4.7 billion artery linking Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, Michigan, a direct lifeline for North America's auto sector. Nearly a quarter of all trade between Canada and the United States crosses this corridor. Car parts move back and forth multiple times before a finished vehicle reaches a showroom floor. Billions of dollars in goods travel that route every single day. For decades, the Ambassador Bridge handled most of that traffic. It was privately owned, it became congested, it became politically sensitive, it became a symbol of dependency. Canada decided to change that. Ottawa financed and led the Gordie Howe project specifically to reduce vulnerability and increase sovereignty over its own trade infrastructure. That is what makes this moment explosive. When Trump allies floated the idea that cross-border cooperation on the bridge could be revisited if trade disputes escalated, particularly around autos and tariffs, it sounded less like policy and more like leverage. The message carried an unmistakable undertone. Cooperation depends on compliance. Carney refused that premise. Instead of framing the bridge as a shared privilege, he reframed it as Canadian infrastructure built to guarantee economic resilience. Canada financed the majority of the project. Canada pushed it forward after years of political gridlock. Canada structured it so that toll revenue would repay construction costs over time. It was designed precisely to prevent political interference from disrupting trade. And that is why the response shocked Washington. Carney did not signal compromise. He did not hint at renegotiation. He emphasized that the bridge would proceed on Canada's terms, serving mutual trade, but not as a bargaining chip. That subtle distinction changes everything. Because the Gordie Howe Bridge represents something larger than a transportation corridor. It represents Canada's shift toward economic independence inside an integrated system. Trump's pressure strategy has always relied on asymmetry. Larger market, larger economy, greater consumer base. The logic suggests Canada must adjust because it depends heavily on U.S. access. But here's the miscalculation. The United States depends just as heavily on uninterrupted Canadian trade in critical sectors. The auto industry is the clearest example. A single disruption at the Detroit-Windsor corridor can idle factories within hours. Supply chains operate on tight schedules. Delays cascade instantly. The Gordie Howe Bridge was built to prevent those choke points. Threatening cooperation around it does not just pressure Canada, it destabilizes American manufacturing. Carney understood that immediately. Instead of escalating rhetoric, he leaned into economic reality. The bridge is nearing completion. Thousands of workers are involved. Cross-border logistics firms are preparing to shift traffic. Automakers are planning routes around it. Contracts are signed. Financing structures are locked in. This is not theoretical leverage, it is concrete already poured into the riverbanks. By refusing to entertain pressure, Carney signaled something deeper than defiance. He signaled permanence. Canada is no longer structuring its economy around the assumption that Washington will always act predictably. The bridge embodies that lesson. It reduces reliance on a privately controlled crossing. It gives Ottawa more operational influence. It strengthens Canada's ability to manage its own trade corridors. Trump's strategy often frames trade disputes as contests of willpower. Demand, escalate, extract concessions. But infrastructure does not respond to political theater the way markets do. Once built, it reshapes power quietly and permanently. And this bridge reshapes power. It strengthens Canada's logistical sovereignty while preserving mutual benefit. It insulates trade from sudden political shocks. It demonstrates that integration does not equal submission. The controversial element here is not the bridge itself. It is the symbolism. For decades, U.S. political messaging assumed Canada would align quickly when confronted with economic threats. Carney's response disrupts that expectation. He is not breaking the alliance. He is redefining its terms. And Washington noticed. Behind closed doors, American business leaders are uneasy. Automakers want stability. Suppliers want predictability. They do not want cross-border infrastructure pulled into tariff fights. They remember past disruptions when bridges closed or slowed. Production lines halted within hours. That memory shapes corporate pressure. Carney is betting on that pressure. He is wagering that American industry will not tolerate politicizing a project so central to continental trade. It is a calculated risk, but it is grounded in supply chain math, not emotion. Trump may view the bridge as leverage. Carney views it as insurance, and when insurance is already paid for and nearly operational, leverage loses its bite. What makes the Gordie Howe Bridge confrontation so explosive is not the concrete or the cables. It is what the bridge represents in the new era of North American politics. This is no longer just about toll booths and trucking routes. It is about control. Who controls access, who controls supply chains, and who gets to decide how integrated economies function when politics turn volatile. When Trump's circle signaled that cross-border cooperation could be reconsidered if trade tensions escalated, the assumption in Washington was that Canada would feel cornered. After all, nearly 3/4 of Canadian exports go to the United States. The imbalance looks obvious on paper. The United States is the larger economy, the larger consumer base, the louder political voice. But what that calculation ignores is operational dependency. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is not a symbolic crossing. It is the most critical trade artery on the continent. Roughly 25% of all goods traded between the two countries pass through this region. On peak days, more than $400 million worth of products move across that narrow stretch of water. And the auto industry is the beating heart of it all. A single vehicle assembled in Michigan or Ontario may cross the border 5, 6, even 7 times before completion. Engines, transmissions, electronics, seats, each component may originate in a different plant on either side. Production operates on just-in-time logistics. Warehouses are minimal. Buffer time is nearly non-existent. Interrupt that flow even briefly and factories idle. That is the vulnerability Washington underestimated. If the bridge becomes politicized, the damage is not asymmetrical. It does not fall solely on Canada. It ricochets into American manufacturing within hours. Carney's response reflected that reality. Instead of escalating rhetorically, he shifted the narrative toward resilience. Canada financed the Gordie Howe Bridge primarily on its own terms. Ottawa structured repayment through toll revenues rather than relying on U.S. appropriations. The project was designed to eliminate bottlenecks and reduce reliance on the privately owned Ambassador Bridge. In other words, Canada prepared for moments exactly like this. That preparation weakens leverage. Trump's trade strategy has often relied on unpredictability. Announce tariffs, apply pressure, force negotiations under deadline. It works best when the opposing side lacks alternatives or redundancy. But infrastructure is the ultimate redundancy. Once built, it does not respond to tweets or press conferences. It stabilizes flows regardless of political cycles. The Gordie Howe Bridge strengthens Canada's logistical independence without cutting the United States out. It enhances trade while limiting political choke points. That dual effect is precisely what makes Washington uneasy. Because if Canada can reduce exposure in one major corridor, it can do so elsewhere. And in many ways, it already is. Ottawa has been diversifying export markets, increasing trade with Europe under CETA, strengthening Pacific ties, and investing in Arctic and Atlantic shipping routes. The bridge fits into a broader strategy of economic insulation. This is not anti-American policy. It is post-naivete policy. For decades, Canada operated under the assumption that deep integration guaranteed stability. Tariff battles over steel, aluminum, lumber, and autos disrupted that belief. The bridge is a response to those lessons. The controversy now lies in perception. From Washington's perspective, Canada's refusal to entertain pressure can look like defiance. From Ottawa's perspective, it is simple risk management. And corporate America is caught in the middle. Major automakers do not want this fight. Neither do logistics companies, nor do unions representing workers on both sides of the border. They remember how quickly assembly lines halted during previous trade disputes. They remember the financial losses that followed. Executives understand something political strategists sometimes ignore. Supply chains are not patriotic. They are mathematical. If disruptions cost billions, pressure builds domestically. Carney's gamble rests on that principle. He is betting that American business interests will push back against any attempt to destabilize cross-border infrastructure. He is wagering that the economic cost of politicizing the bridge will outweigh any short-term political gain. So far, that bet appears rational. Markets reacted cautiously, but did not panic. Automakers maintained production forecasts. Logistics firms continued preparing for the bridge's opening. There were no signs of capital flight or emergency restructuring. That stability itself is telling. It suggests industry views the controversy as political theater rather than imminent disruption. And that is where the potential backfire emerges. If Washington continues framing the bridge as leverage, it risks reinforcing Canada's long-term diversification strategy. The more unpredictable the relationship appears, the more Ottawa invests in alternatives. Leverage only works when the other side believes you are indispensable. The Gordie Howe Bridge weakens that perception. It demonstrates that Canada can build critical infrastructure largely on its own terms. It signals that trade corridors can be insulated from political turbulence. It reveals that integration does not automatically equal dependency. That shift alters the tone of future negotiations. When both sides understand that disruption harms them equally, pressure tactics lose potency. There is also a geopolitical dimension. Allies beyond North America are watching how Washington handles disputes with close partners. If cross-border infrastructure becomes conditional on political alignment, smaller nations will accelerate efforts to diversify away from US-centric systems. Canada's stance may appear modest, but symbolically, it is significant. It shows that an allied nation can resist pressure without rupturing the alliance. It can assert sovereignty without abandoning cooperation. And that is the delicate balance Carney is trying to strike. The bridge will open. Trade will flow. The headlines will fade, but the underlying message will remain. North American integration is evolving from assumption to negotiation, from automatic alignment to conditional cooperation. The Gordie Howe Bridge stands as a steel and concrete reminder that infrastructure shapes power more permanently than rhetoric ever can. Trump may have intended to apply pressure. Carney responded by reinforcing foundations. And in geopolitics, reinforced foundations tend to outlast political storms. If this story surprised you, that's exactly the point. The biggest geopolitical shifts don't always happen with dramatic speeches or breaking news alerts. They happen through infrastructure decisions, trade recalculations, and quiet moments where leaders choose resilience over reaction. The Gordie Howe Bridge is more than steel and cables. It's a signal about sovereignty, leverage, and how alliances evolve when pressure replaces trust. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Canada handled this the right way, or should Ottawa have taken a different approach? Was this smart strategy from Carney, or unnecessary escalation? And most importantly, if trade tensions keep rising, who actually has more to lose? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown valuable, hit the like button so more people can see how these decisions really shape North America's future. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next move in this story could change everything.